Ann Wright is a 29-year U.S. Army Reserves veteran who retired as colonel and a former U.S. diplomat who resigned in March 2003 in opposition to the war in Iraq. She served in Nicaragua, Grenada, Somalia, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Sierra Leone, Micronesia, and Mongolia. In December 2001, she was on the small team that reopened the U.S. Embassy in Kabul, Afghanistan, and is co-author of the book Dissent, Voices of Conscience. And thanks so much for joining us this morning and on this very busy weekend. We've uh, we've observed the Trump regime's authoritarian policies on a wide range of issues over these past 6 months, including eliminating federal agencies approved by Congress, including tragically USAID that may very well have killed more than 300,000 children across the world who are dependent on medications for AIDS, tuberculosis, and other diseases paid for by the U.S. over many decades. And then, of course, we've had deportation of university students simply for protesting or expressing opposition to Israel's slaughter of Palestinian civilians in Gaza, mass deportation of non-citizens, and even some citizens by mass ICE agents, including children battling cancer. We've had lawsuits and threats to defund media companies, law firms, and universities, threats against judges who rule against Trump's executive orders, directing the DOJ to open criminal investigations against Trump's perceived political enemies. And certainly in the last few weeks, we've had the arrest of the mayor of Newark, New Jersey, and a New Jersey congressional representative, the censorship of Black, Latino, LGBTQ history in the military, federal libraries and museums. We've had federal agents assault and handcuffing of U.S. Senator Alex Padilla at a Christie Nome press conference just, what was that, 3 days ago. Trump, over the past 6 months, has defied the Constitution, the rule of law, and engaged in blatant acts of corruption so often, it's really hard to summarize it in just a paragraph or two. Taking in all that's happened, and what are your concerns about the future of U.S. democracy for someone in your position who, for years, defended U.S. democracy by serving in the military?
Well, it's a pretty dim outlook right now, but that just means that we, as people that are concerned about our own democracy, have to be stepping up and challenging, which is being done in so many ways in so many places. I mean, and nobody's sitting back and just letting it happen. And just this last Saturday, yesterday, we see that there were over 2,000 protests in the United States against all of these, that laundry list of things that you just read. I mean, and seeing the signs that people had at the various demonstrations. I was particularly watching for the one in Honolulu where I live, and oh my goodness, I mean, they didn't leave out one issue. Every issue was covered in that. So I think the mobilization of citizens against this is really ramping up. And while it's so difficult when we have the courts that aren't acting fast enough to stop uh, what we know are just illegal actions and letting them go on for lengthy amounts of times, like keeping university students in prison for 3 months now for Khalil Mahmoud. 3 months that guy's been in prison when he should have been released. He should never have gone there. And of course, within days, he was ordered to be released, and then they wouldn't do it.
Right.
So it is a unprecedented time in the history of our country. Although some may go back and say, well, when old no, what's his name? The guy that was doing all those slams in the Congress, Joseph McCarthy days. But I
Right.
don't know that the federal government really followed McCarthy's, you know, route as much as what is happening now with Trump and all of his accolades that are picked specifically to implement something that he was unable to do in his first term.
Well, last week and over the opposition of California Governor Gavin Newsom, Trump federalized 4,000 National Guard troops and deployed 700 U.S. Marines to Los Angeles in response to what were really mostly peaceful protests. There was some property destruction. And of course, those protests were provoked by these indiscriminate, very cruelly carried out militarized ICE deportation raids in California. And a federal court will soon rule on whether or not this deployment of U.S. military is unconstitutional. As I believe the only reason to do that over a governor's objections is really if there's an invasion, and clearly there's not, despite Trump's rhetoric. Um, how serious is Trump's decision to militarize the federal response to protests in LA as a threat to democracy, given that the U.S. military may soon be deployed to other U.S. cities where Trump, where Republican governors and local officials may attempt to suppress anti-Trump protests? I wonder if you believe that these troops have sufficient training to safely and fairly engage with citizens who are merely exercising the right of free speech and constitutionally protected right to protest their government.
Yeah, well, and when Trump himself says that there's going to be extreme force used against protesters, particularly in Washington, for the military parade that was actually the Trump birthday parade that they say would cost only 45 million, and now everybody's talking about over $100 million for this little 45-minute parade in Washington, D.C. So the threats to any sort of protest in the United States are really ramping up, and it between Black Lives Matter back in Trump 1, and then now all the Palestine solidarity protests that have meant that students have been either suspended from the universities, thrown out of the universities, not being able to graduate from the universities, not getting scholarships, and then the issue of international students and a ban on them essentially that's having to be battled out in court. I mean, it is just I mean, you couldn't write a science fiction script that would have all of these elements in it. I mean, people would just laugh at it as being just unbelievable, and yet we're living through it. But what we have to do is just keep pushing back on all of these sorts of things. And we did have protests that were inside the mall, in the secured area. It was really interesting. Here you have a glorification of my old U.S. Army. I was in it 29 years. So here we go with the 250th anniversary of the Army. And what do they do? I mean, the Army, the big, strong Army, which is Trump is trying to portray, and all that. Uh, and so they put up the highest fences that we've ever seen in Washington and everywhere. And it made Trump's inauguration look like kid stuff. The military was so protected from its own citizens that it was, I mean, I think the military itself was probably going, this isn't quite the way this is supposed to work. I mean, we're supposed to be defending our country and our citizens, and yet you are putting up the fences so the citizens can't even come over to say hello, and you have to do a security check because you think they're going to do something mean to us, and we're the Army. I mean, they can't do anything mean to us because we're meaner than they are, kind of
Mhm.
sort of thing. But it really is quite ironic and ludicrous how this happened. And the other part I'll say that old Trump, he wanted to have all of this military paraphernalia running down the streets of Washington, D.C. Well, I think the Army kind of uh, gave him a raspberry, although he doesn't quite realize it yet. I mean, the most of the military equipment were antiquated old Army tanks that nobody ever uses. I
Right.
mean, we do not have tank warfare as part of our uh, modern warfare that the United States is using. That was out 30 years ago. And yet that was what the Army decided they would send in there rather than the sleeker, more lethal things, which actually I'm glad they weren't there. But I think Trump doesn't know that he's been snookered a little bit on his own parade.
Yeah. No, I'm glad you talked about the parade on June 14th, coinciding with all the thousands of demonstrations all over the country. It was really quite a contrast between grassroots people all rising up opposed to Trump's a threat to democracy. And then you have, like you said, this fenced in, really bizarre kind of stroking of Trump's ego, which is really, as you said, really what it was all about. But last Tuesday, Trump had a speech at Fort Bragg, which I know you're very much aware of. The country, maybe not so much, but at this Fort Bragg speech, Trump clearly broke with tradition by being highly partisan. He addressed the troops saying, quote, in Los Angeles, the governor of California, the mayor of Los Angeles, they're incompetent and they're paid troublemakers, agitators, and insurrectionists. They're engaged in this willful attempt to nullify federal law and aid the occupation of this city by criminal invaders, unquote. So he said this in the speech at Fort Bragg. Disturbingly, some of the soldiers cheered Trump's comments. And then you had the news site military.com that reported that this applause was also a form of political manipulation, since the troops in the audience had been screened for their political beliefs. And there was internal 82nd Airborne Division communications that revealed a tightly orchestrated effort to curate the optics of Trump's visit to Fort Bragg, including handpicking soldiers for the audience based again on their political allegiance and how they looked, right? Uh, the troops ultimately selected to be behind Trump, in the view of the camera, were almost exclusively male. And I wonder what your
And
reaction.
white.
And white, absolutely. What's your reaction to this politicization of the U.S. military that, you know, Jeet here of The Nation magazine, I think he put it quite well. He noted in a recent article in The Nation, he said this was really politicization of the military was really the quickest way for the U.S. to become a fascist police state.
Well, of course, it's absolutely wrong. It goes against all the military tenets that have been in place in our military forever. And while he was able to do that at Fort Bragg, I am sure behind the scenes there is a lot of dissatisfaction, dissension about what he did. And while certainly the majority of the people, well, maybe not majority, but I'd say over 50% of the people are come from conservative backgrounds. They come from families that have been, military legacy sort of families, and so they've grown up with Fox News. They've grown up with, uh, the conservative bent and a very pro-military bent, and so, but I mean, that's always been a reality, but it's not what military unit leaders ever talk about. I mean, you do not talk politics. And actually, you don't even have the TV stations. Now you either have Fox News on or you have CNN. And so that determines, which bent, but and they do that in Congress. When the Democrats are in charge of like the House, they always have CNN on. Right now, the Republicans are in at the House and the Senate, so they have Fox News all the time. But when I was in the military, we that was not one of the things that would happen. I mean, you tried to keep the politics out. And the politics would come in when a particular administration decided it was going to go to war. And if you didn't go along with that, if you thought that was pretty stupid, then you didn't. Your role was not to question it. Um, um, your role was to implement whatever the president and the administration had, and that's one reason why I finally resigned, not from the military, but from the State Department, is that finally I said, no, I'm not going to go along with the U.S. war on Iraq. And we have had U.S. military during the genocide in Gaza who have gotten conscientious objector status. Some of them have gone AWOL and have faced punishment. Um, but the role of the military is to implement the policies of a presidential administration, but it's not you don't have the president and the military kind of hand picking, cherry picking, so to speak, all of the people that stand behind them when they're giving presentations. And so if that was coming out in military.com, which is a very widely read military website, as well as Stars and Stripes, that shows that there are a lot of people that are very concerned about how the Trump administration is politicizing the military.
Yeah. And why haven't we heard more objections to this, what happened at Fort Bragg and other instances of violation of, it's really decades-long protocol? Why haven't we heard from them objecting to the politicization of the U.S. military, from either the career active duty commanding officers, which I guess, they have a lot to lose given Trump's pattern of retribution. Or maybe more importantly, why haven't we heard from retired generals and admirals, many who must be clearly horrified by what they're seeing unfold in the Pentagon under Trump and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth?
Well, you are hearing some of it. And in fact, I've got an article that's just about to come out with my little version. And in fact, it's probably the 10th article. I mean, when you start writing up all of the things that have been going on, and you mentioned the LBGT issues, Black Lives Matter. Well, the whole issue for me as a woman in the military, where within days after Trump came in and Hegseth became Secretary of State, they fired the two women who've ever made it to the top of the chief of naval operations and the head of the Coast Guard. First time 4-star women have ever gotten in to be in charge of major military groups or services, and I mean, between throwing throwing out, well, the whole issue of diversity, equity, and inclusiveness, where they've used that as the battle cry. Anybody that's have touched those three words is on the outs with the white male bullies that are part of the Trump administration, and how they've been able to get away with it because they just are firing everybody. But it will come back on them. There's no doubt about that, that the institution itself knows exactly what's happening and are in a predicament in a way. The active duty people are in a predicament because they know full well they're going to get fired if they start talking in any way. Whereas in most presidential administrations, there are ways that even active duty people can offer comments that at least show, that there's a diversity of opinion. But the role is not to totally go against policy. You resign with that. There are a lot of retired officers who have spoken out, but the Trump administration doesn't care. They just flatly don't care. And when you have these administrations that there's no way to find someone in them that has the position that they can actually affect some change, if you can convince them that what they're doing is not in the best interest of the country. It may be in what Donald Trump personally wants as his interest, but when you're really looking at the role of the military and the apoliticalization or no politicalization of the military, it's stunning that the senior leadership of this administration is so willing to just go along with these extreme ideas of white supremacy is really what it's all about. White supremacy in the military and in virtually every aspect of the federal government now. If you are a person of color, if you are a woman, I mean, you're on thin ice with this administration. So we're going back to the days of having to re-implement civil rights in a way, and going back 50 years in time. What this administration is just taking us back decades.
Absolutely. And hopefully, as you said, it'll rebound after this Trump era is over. Let's hope. Um, and just in relation to what you were just talking about, during Trump's first term in the White House, we had several generals and the Secretary of Defense push back against Trump's darkest instincts to politicize the U.S. military. The parade thing was rejected the first time out. And just horrifyingly, Trump ordered soldiers to shoot peaceful protesters in the legs during the 2020 George Floyd protests in Washington, D.C. And of course, the generals in the Pentagon, higher ups, that's crazy. this is not this is not what America is. But today, Trump is, as you said, he's fired many of these long-serving generals and other higher ups in the chain of command who could push back during those first 4 years of Trump. And you also have the Pete Hegseth ordering the firing of the JAG officers, right? The guys who are supposed to be there to advise the Army, Navy, and Air Force, what's legal, what's in compliance with law, what's in compliance with the Constitution, and certainly we have a situation now where all the guardrails within the military, it seems, are gone. I hope I'm wrong about that. There may be some things that can block Trump's exploitation and abuse of the military, but I'm wondering, what are your concerns about the military and the Pentagon and the chain of command that Trump might very well take to some extreme and horrifying places over this next 3.5 years?
Well, I think the senior leadership of the military is horrified about what's going on. They're horrified that this kid, Pete Hegseth, is the Secretary of Defense. He has no qualifications at all. I mean, and the two veterans units that he supposedly was kind of the CEO of, both went bankrupt. He is morally bankrupt with all of the not just allegations. I mean, his wife and mother even, told that he's an abuser, that he's an alcoholic, he's all of that. And a junior person in the Army Reserves. He was a lieutenant colonel. So he does not have the background, of course, to be that. He was a Fox News commentator, for God's sakes, and Trump liked the way he talked. So he gets to be Secretary of Defense. And then Trump decides, as the head of all the military forces, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs is not someone that's being picked out of those that have all of the qualifications, which are, leading one of the unified commands. And there's a whole series for 4 stars to even be considered to be the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. So who does he pick? He takes somebody out of retirement that's a 3 star. And I mean, in the military, the rank does make a difference. And those people that are in there get perturbed, when the system is upset, and when you draw out people that are totally unqualified. Well, I wouldn't say totally unqualified, but he is definitely unqualified compared to all of the other people that are on active duty, that have served all of the places that we want people to serve before they become the head of all of the services. So I think I don't think the military brass is going along, and that's why they're trying to eliminate a lot of the general officer positions, that they are slicing the numbers of general officers to get rid of specific individuals that they think, have some professional militarism, professionalism, and who will be very careful about how they implement the policies that the Trump administration comes out on how you treat the troops, how you take care of them, and things like that. All of them, once they're given an order, they'll do it. But the way they do it and how they treat their own troops, and then finally that one of them might just say, I cannot do what you're telling me to do. And I, as a 3 star or 4 star, I will not do it, and I will resign. And you can court-martial me if you want to. But these are the reasons why I think you are jeopardizing the national security of our country.
That would go a long way, I think, to waking up part of the country that may not already be aware of the threat that we're seeing unfold here. Yesterday, and you talked a little bit about the protesters at the military parade in Washington, but there were estimates of some 5 million people all over the country at these 2,100 actually protests that happened in small towns and big cities all over the country. Um, and it seems that this really was the largest protest yet during Trump's second term. And as impressive as that was. It's not clear that major protests by themselves are capable of slowing down or stopping Trump from further demolishing our democratic institutions or violating the Constitution. And as Trump escalates his attack on democracy, what additional strategies and tactics do you think will be necessary to more effectively prevent the nation from being taken over by or surrendering to, as you described earlier, this white supremacist fascist dictatorship that Trump and his inner circle clearly want to impose on the US?
Well, we have to be brave about this, and we have to be courageous, and we cannot sit back on our couches and just bemoan the fact that this stuff's going on. We've got to help organizations that are working hard. We've got to help the National Lawyers Guild, the ACLU, the Center for Constitutional Rights, the Center for Conscientious Objection. All of these places where they have an infrastructure and they've been doing this for decades, that they have challenged lots and lots of presidential administrations and the various types of illegal things that, each one of the presidential administration tries to get away with what they can. But it's these organizations that help hold the line and try to make sure that we keep our Constitution intact, and that no one gets away with breaking the law. So we've got to really hang in there and keep supporting these organizations, and then uh, work with peace organizations and those that are willing to take a big step forward. We have new organizations, this 5051 and Indivisible, and that's kind of an older one now, but there are a lot of edgier groups that are willing to push things a little bit further. And while the pushback from the Trump administration, we know will happen, but unless we stand up to it and have brave people willing to actually to go to jail for things, and that's where we have, just on Friday night, we had 60 U.S. Veterans that sat on the Capitol steps in Washington, D.C. And you would think sitting on steps you couldn't get arrested, but yes, you can. They had a press conference over at the on the in front of the U.S. Supreme Court about all of these things that the Trump administration is planning to use the U.S. military in, and saying, no military on our streets, and all of the things actually that you had talked about earlier in the show. That we had about 150 veterans and family members and supporters that were there for the press conference, and then the idea was to walk across the street and go sit on the Capitol steps to be a protest uh, uh, at the Capitol. Well, the police, of course, got wind of it. I mean, you can't do anything that the police aren't going to know a little bit about. But they were a little slow in putting up some bicycle barricades to kind of slow down people. But 60 people were able to get around the barricades, and it wasn't like a January 6th assault on the Capitol. I'll just tell you that. Most of the people were over 60, and and so they weren't walking very fast, and I only saw two people that were able to even run. The rest of them were walking. So they got on the steps and had the banners of no military on the streets and all that, and then they got arrested, and 8 of them ended up having to spend all night in jail and all day yesterday waiting for their court arraignment, where they will go to trial on. I quite honestly, I don't know quite what the charges are right now, but 8 of them have been charged, so they'll have to go to trial. But it's these sorts of things that we've got to be willing to just step out a little bit further. Uh, I would have normally been on those Capitol steps as a veteran, but I have a pending trial based on a disruption in a congressional hearing about 2 months ago. And my trial isn't until July 1st. And part of the pre-trial agreement that you have to sign is, unless you want to go to jail and sit in there until your trial date. And I certainly didn't want to spend 4 months in jail just waiting for a trial. But one of the things you have to sign is that you will not get arrested during the time until your trial. And if you do, you could be put back in jail for 180 days and a $1,000 fine. So that was the reason that I decided I would be a supporter and not one sitting on the steps. But it broke my heart to see all these friends of mine that were sitting up there and not to be able to be there too, because it is important that we, that all of us, no matter what position we have, whether we're veterans, whether we're doctors, nurses, whatever, it is important in our community that our community sees that we as individuals are willing to stand up to what we feel is illegal, perhaps criminal activity of our own government, and we're willing to take the hits on it. That we're willing to go to jail for it. We're willing to go to trial and argue in court why we feel what we did, and why we did it. Although generally courts won't let us to say why we broke the ordinance. You have to wait till after you're convicted, and then in your statement to the judge, then you can say why you did it, which is, justice turned upside down, but that's the way the courts work.
Well, we are out of time, and I thank you so much for your moral leadership all these years and for standing up for what's right in the Constitution and democracy. And certainly you've taken hits in terms of that stand. And I know many people across the country appreciate all you've done. And I really thank you for taking the time to speak with us today.
Well, it's a pleasure, Scott, and thanks for your program, and keep working with the community and having voices out there that hopefully will encourage people to stand up against inequality and criminal acts that our government does.
Oh, I should just ask you, is there any websites or resources online that you would recommend our listeners tap into?
Yep. Well, my particular website is called voicesofconscience.com. But of course, Veterans for Peace has a great website, Code Pink Women for Peace, World Beyond War. And then I'm part of what's called the Gaza Freedom Flotilla, and we're challenging the Israeli naval blockade and genocide of Gaza and the ethnic cleansing of the West Bank. So that's freedomflotilla.org.
Again, thank you for spending time with us, Ann, and all you do. Appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. Thank you. Thanks.